With the Dead Space Remake releasing on January 27th of 2023, I wanted to go back and look at the original Dead Space from 2008 and just pretty much break down and analyze what made this game so great and why it still holds up today. Dead Space is a 2008 survival horror game developed by EA Redwood Shores, later branded Visceral Games, and published by Electronic Arts. It was released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 and Microsoft Windows as the debut entry in the Dead Space series set on a mining spaceship overrun by deadly monsters called necromorphs. Following the discovery of an artifact called a marker, the player controls engineer Isaac Clarke as he navigates the spaceship and fights the necromorphs while struggling with a growing psychosis. Gameplay has Isaac exploring different areas through its narrative, solving environmental puzzles, and finding ammunition, and equipment to survive. Immersion was a core element of the game, with HUD elements being in-universe in story sequences like cutscenes and audio or video logs playing in real time. In addition, the standard HUD elements were incorporated into the environment with suitable contextual or over-in-game explanations. In the team's opinions, the setting was better realized and conveyed as a side effect of this approach. A quick turn option at one point had been implemented, but had been removed also several times during production. It was finally removed for good, because mapping the feature to the last available controller buttons caused players to turn accidentally during dangerous situations. The Microsoft version of the control scheme went through several different configurations, with the team wanting the best possible configuration for the mouse and keyboard. One of the founding gameplay principles was what Glenn Schofield coined strategic dismemberment.
Strategic dismemberment is our main mechanic in Dead Space. It's what you use to kill the enemies, basically. Instead of just headshots or body shots, you got to dismember these guys.
Wanted something that wasn't just fire blindly and sort of light things up and you got a bunch of guns and you just sort of overwhelm dudes. We wanted the player to feel sort of just powerful enough and to use a lot of improvisation.
Wouldn't it be cool if you cut off their legs and they kept crawling at you? Or if they cut off your head and they still came at you a different way. So we went deeper and deeper into that, and it just felt like something really new and really cool.
You think about horror movies, right? And it's like when they're being chased, people are always required to do more fine movements, like get the car keys in the lock and like start or dial the phone or whatever. Like big swing and punching, that's not as big. Like trying to pull off something finer under stress is more scary.
The focus on severing limbs to kill enemies. This distinguished Dead Space from the majority of shooters, which instead placed focus on headshots or allowed volley of weapons to fire against enemies. Weapon accuracy and enemy behavior were adjusted around this concept. For example, enemies became enraged by traditional headshots and charged at the player, rather than being killed instantly. A two-person co-op multiplayer option was prototyped over a 3-month period, but was eventually cut. We would see that reemerge, though, for Dead Space 3. And the team for Dead Space 1 wanted to focus on making a very polished single-player experience. In North America, the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions of Dead Space released on October 13th in 2008, with the PC version releasing on October 20th. All versions released in Australia on October 23rd and in Europe on October 24th. The PC version was one of Electronic Arts' releases protected by the controversial digital rights management product, SecureROM. Electronic Arts released an Ultra Limited Edition to 1,000 copies. The package included Dead Space Downfall, a bonus DVD, the Dead Space art book, a lithograph, and a Dead Space comic. People who bought the game within the first 2 weeks of its release could download the exclusive suits for free. The Obsidian suit for PlayStation 3, and the Elite suit for the Xbox 360. After release, additional gameplay perks in the form of suits and weapons were released as paid downloadable content. When it came to critical reception, games media was generally pretty positive on the first game. The Xbox 360 version scored an 89 out of 100 based on 79 reviews on Metacritic, and the PlayStation 3 scored 88 out of 100 based on 67 reviews. And the PC version scored 86 out of 100 based on 28. All scores denoted generally favorable reviews. Upon release, Dead Space earned critical acclaim from a lot of journalists. OneUp.com praised its innovations in third-person gameplay, though it faulted several elements that felt like padding. Eurogamer enjoyed the experience despite some of the frustrating design elements and other parts that clashed with the horror aesthetic. Andrew Renier of Game Informer enjoyed the time with the game, praising its commitment to horror elements and gameplay elements. In a second opinion, Joe Juba called it the premier accomplishment in survival horror since Resident Evil 4. Although not every outlet really liked the game. The reviewer Megan Watt, writing for the official Xbox magazine, was less positive due to several mechanical frustrations and lack of scary elements. However, it is worth noting that this reviewer, Megan, is deaf. So having her review a game where audio is such an important part seems like a mismanagement issue on the part of the official Xbox magazine.
Fortunate on this game that Glenn realized early on, even though he didn't quite know what it was he wanted, he knew that audio was really important. And so he's really made us a big part of it.
We've done this before where we've turned off a scary movie, the picture, and just run the audio, and it's very scary. But if you turn off the audio and just watch the movie, it's not scary at all. So in our game, audio is just about everything.
But nonetheless, critics and fans alike loved Dead Space. As of the recording of this video, January of 2023, Dead Space has been out for 14 years. Having not touched the game for quite a long time, I wanted to go ahead and take a look here at the controls and compare that to what a more modern or standard control scheme should look like with the game. Now, taking a look here with the Xbox 360 version in mind, I did play this on the Xbox Series S console. Pulling the left trigger will bring up your currently equipped weapon, and of course, pressing the right trigger will fire it. Pulling the left trigger to raise the weapon in 2008 was still a fairly new idea. It was popularized by games like Gears of War, but for the most part, there were a lot of games at the time that still just used the standard pointer controls where wherever your cursor was pointing, that is where you would shoot, and there was no need to raise your weapon. Now, while holding the left trigger and pressing the RB button with a few different types of weapons will bring up a secondary fire. When it comes to the plasma cutter, it just changes the angle at which the beam is shot. But other guns will provide a zoom function. Some will also launch a grenade. When not having the left trigger pulled in, pressing RB will cause your character to stomp on the ground. This was something that I still haven't seen in many games, and it remains, to my knowledge, pretty unique to Dead Space. Pulling the right trigger by itself will swing whatever weapon you have for a melee attack, and holding the right stick in will give you a pointed direction on where it is that you need to go to progress through your mission. Now, again, while holding the left trigger, pressing A is the reload. Even back then, that was a little odd. The X button for most shooters is unanimously the reload button, but with holding the left trigger and pressing X, you will shoot out a stasis beam that will freeze enemies in place for a very limited amount of time, and of course that can always be upgraded. And then of course, holding the left trigger and B will shoot out a kinesis beam, which is essentially something that lets you manipulate items in the environment. It's used to solve puzzles, and you can also use this to launch enemy projectiles back at the enemy. When hitting the back button, it brings up your inventory in the rig, and using the D-pad will quick select through different weapons and different items that are on the corresponding directions. Now, going back and playing this game, I did have to rewire my brain a bit out of a more modern and into a classic style of control schemes when it comes to Dead Space. I'm so used to X being the reload button. The fact that it shot out the stasis beam was something that I wasted a lot of stasis on enemies when trying to reload. The basic core gameplay loop of Dead Space is loading into a new area, being pointed to an objective, having a slight bit of variation when it comes to exploration, but you always end up being funneled down a main path. Now, when it comes to upgrading your suit, when it comes to upgrading items and weapons, it's not a complicated system. Essentially, you're given these things called power nodes, and you can additionally buy them at a store for 10,000 credits apiece. And you're put into a grid with different nodes where some nodes are empty and you just need to use those to bridge to another node that'll let you upgrade either your health or your weapon damage or the amount of air in your suit when you go into a vacuum or the amount of distance and length that it takes for stasis to wear off. Graphically, though, the game is definitely showing its 14-year-old age. On my 43-inch 4K LCD LG TV and playing on the Xbox Series S, the game has a ton of jagged edges, and it's at times hard to look at. I remember the game being absolutely beautiful, and no doubt the remake will be, and the remake reminds me of what I thought the game looked like back in 2008, even though obviously that's not what it looks like looking at it now. The game is also left out from receiving the FPS boost that the Xbox platform offers. And with the Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3 backwards compatible games receiving the FPS boost, I can only think that the reason why the original didn't receive a 60 FPS boost is due to the fact that it is being remastered in 4K for 60 FPS. It is definitely a game that I highly recommend going back to and playing, if not to just see how far we have come, especially once the remake releases. Something that I would like to have seen them do, which I doubt that they have, and they haven't given any indication of this, and this has only been made popular by Halo the Master Chief Collection. I really would have liked to have seen a graphics toggle between the old and the new. Going between area to area in the original Dead Space would require you to ride a tram that you would get on and go to the next area and get on and go to the next area after completing repairs and objectives and receiving items as well to progress throughout the story. On the Xbox Series S, the load times were not long between each area. I would say between 10 to 15 seconds. The initial load, though, seems to be a bit longer, maybe upwards to over a minute. But once you get loaded in, loading in between area to area really doesn't take very long. The original Dead Space is roughly 8.5 to 10 hours long. I finished my first playthrough on the Xbox Series S with roughly about 8 hours and 35 minutes saved on game time. The remake will probably be just about as long unless they've expanded on some areas. I do hope people understand going into this that it is 8.5 hours, and the 8.5 hours is a very good 8.5 hours. With it being a horror game, they don't want to reuse the same things when it comes to jump scares and frights and locations. They want to keep everything fresh, and with a short runtime of 8.5 hours, they absolutely achieve their goal with that. One thing that I am hoping makes it in to the remake, and it is here also in the original game, and it was in the original game on release, is a new game plus mode. This is paramount. For a game that is 8.5 hours long, you don't upgrade everything that you have 100%. The game is meant to be played over and over and over again. And when you beat the game multiple times, it shows on your save file round 1, round 2, round 3. The game keeps track of how many times you've played it. So I'm really, really hoping that EA can get this right and have New Game Plus in on release and not as a DLC or not as future content that they want to string along the player with. Dead Space 2008 was a game that was revolutionary for its time and is a game that still remains unique. I look very forward to the remake releasing in January of 2023 and highly recommend going back and playing the original, whether it's on PC or the Xbox platform via backwards compatibility.
Brace yourselves! He's gonna smash us into the hull!
I think it's me. It's all falling apart here.
Hey, Isaac. Coming? Where is everybody? Up there! No! This transformation, it's remarkable.
Don't you want to be reunited with the people you lost? Our homecoming will be truly divine.
There's still a way out for us. But we don't have much time.